In the year 1965, tucked into the grey mist of southern Wales, St. Elgar's College of Music thrived as a sanctuary of orchestral tradition. Its halls echoed with the sounds of bowstrings and breath, of theory and discipline. Students were chosen not just for their talent, but for their devotion, for the quiet piety with which they approached their instruments. This wasn't just a conservatory, it was a cathedral of sound. But something went wrong in Choral Room 6. The room had always been odd. Built in 1889, it was an afterthought, not part of the original floor plan. An extension donated by a nobleman whose name was later removed from all college records. The door bore no number for the first decade, then was painted over in white, as if to cancel something. Students joked that it was the 6½ room. A chamber that had no official map and no key, only a long brass handle that groaned when turned. In October of 1965, a graduate vocal ensemble known as the Corvus Choir began rehearsing in that room. There were 16 of them, 4 sopranos, 4 altos, 4 tenors, 4 basses, led by a student conductor named Iwan Meredith. Meredith was brilliant, but troubled. His notebooks were filled with sketches of spirals and modulated scales that seemed to loop back on themselves. He once told a professor that he believed music was the shape of time, and that the perfect melody could reorder causality. It was Meredith who discovered the hymn. The piece had no title, no attribution. It was handwritten on brittle parchment found in a broken organ bench in Choral Room 6. 8 pages of pneumatic notation, square medieval symbols that drifted in and out of modern staff format, as if caught between centuries. The ink was faded to the point of invisibility, but when the page was angled toward light, the lines emerged like old bruises. Meredith transcribed the hymn and taught it to the Corvus Choir. What happened during the final recording session is unclear. The college's archivist, a meticulous man named Dr. Raymond Ashe, had set up a reel-to-reel recorder to capture the performance. He pressed record. The ensemble began to sing. The first 90 seconds of audio are normal. Harmonies blend with precise intonation. The language is Latin but not ecclesiastical. Seems older, more pagan. There are no distinct words for God or salvation, only repetition of phrases like obex vocem, barrier voice, and memoriam saltus, the leap of memory. Then, without transition, static bleeds in. At 1:47, the frequencies distort into a long droning tone. Not dissonant, but deeply unpleasant. Pulses rhythmically, mimicking breath. At 2:08, a sharp crack interrupts the drone, followed by what sounds like metal scraping across stone. 2:16, the screams begin. They are not panicked or chaotic. They are rhythmic 16 voices screaming on pitch, in harmony. The effect is nauseating, like a choir performing terror. This continues until 3:03, when the tape abruptly cuts off. When staff entered Choral Room 6, there were no bodies. Only 16 black robes, folded neatly, placed equidistantly in a perfect spiral on the scorched wooden floor. The pews had been dragged to form a circle. In the center sat the original manuscript, now blank, its ink erased as if by time itself. The college sealed the room. Official cause of disappearance: unexplained vanishing during rehearsal. The Corvus Choir was declared dead in absentia 6 months later. Families were compensated. Investigations stalled. But the tape remained. Dr. Ashe made 2 copies. One he gave to the college. One he locked in his own safe. The original, he said, was unplayable. The tape had warped and looped on itself. In his notes, Ashe wrote, "The voices are still there. Somehow. When I try to play it, I hear them beneath the hiss. Not louder, just closer." Over the next 4 decades, Choral Room 6 became a campus legend. Students dared each other to touch the doorknob. Professors warned against it. A visiting lecturer named Julia Farrow reportedly had a seizure after standing near the door for more than 15 minutes. She later described a pressure behind the eyes, like music played backward in the skull. In 2002, the room was officially bricked over. But stories continued. Late at night, during winter term, some students claimed to hear humming in the corridors. A 4-part harmony, always the same progression. Always faint, always in Latin, A graduate student named Ellis Morgan began researching the case for his doctoral thesis in 2010. He uncovered new evidence. 1. A letter from Meredith's father, written in 1967, claiming his son had sent a final note with only one sentence. "We did not go forward. We went inward." 2. A photograph taken the day before the performance, the only known image of the Corvus choir. When zoomed in, the background window of Choral Room 6 reflects a spiral symbol drawn on the chalkboard. It does not match any known musical notation. 3. A modern spectral analysis of the surviving tape revealed that the final frequencies correspond to astronomical measurements. Specifically, the angular position of the constellation Corvus on October 13, 1965. Morgan disappeared before completing his thesis. His laptop was found in the university library. On it was a single audio file, labeled Choral 6. It is exactly 3 minutes and 3 seconds long. The last 30 seconds are silent. But when played backward, those 30 seconds form a melody that matches the missing hymn. Not just in structure, in pitch. It is the same performance, reversed. Some believe the Corvus choir found something in that room. Not a ghost or demon, but a structure, a space within sound, an architecture made of echo and breath and repetition. Something ancient, something that required harmony to unlock. Others think it was a ritual, that Meredith engineered the entire performance to open a door, to where no one knows. Today, the building that housed St. Elgar's College has been converted into apartments. Choral Room 6 remains sealed, but tenants in Unit 2C, which shares a wall with the old rehearsal space, have reported strange disturbances, a persistent humming in the walls, the smell of scorched wood, and in one case a dream, 16 figures standing in a circle, humming in unison, their faces hidden by robes, their voices blending into one low chord. A voice, not spoken, but felt, whispered, "Join the harmony. Leave the name." The tenant, a software engineer named Theo Lane, moved out a week later. When asked why, he simply said, "There's music you shouldn't hear, and some rooms are not built to contain it." The decision to seal Choral Room 6 was supposed to end the matter. Officials at St. Elgar's believed that walls and brick could muffle not just sound, but history. But they underestimated the reach of resonance. One of the earliest signs came not from a student, but from a faculty member. Professor Leonard Blaze, a specialist in harmonic theory, was asked to review the surviving audio of the Corvus choir for archival integrity. Blaze, a skeptic by nature and atheist by declaration, reported something strange. The tape hummed back. Not physically, not with vibration, but emotionally. "It was like listening to your own memory of fear," he later wrote. Intrigued, Blaze began examining the hymn's notation in detail. He believed it followed no known mode or scale, but something he called an echo key, a theoretical structure where each note's harmonic overtone intentionally canceled out another. The result, he hypothesized, was a kind of auditory 0 point, a perfect cancellation of identity. He published a private memo to a circle of musicologists titled The Chordal Aperture. In it, he described how certain arrangements, sung in precise harmonic balance, might open what he termed resonant corridors, spaces of auditory architecture that do not obey Euclidean rules. These corridors, he warned, could retain echoes long after the sound ended. Other signs surfaced. A third-year cellist named Harriet Powell reported that her metronome, a wind-up model passed down from her grandfather, began skipping beats. Not in speed, but in logic. It would click 1-2-4-5-3 and then reset. Her roommate, a voice major, claimed that the clicking formed a rhythm that matched the first line of the Corvus hymn. She had never heard the tape. Around the same time, multiple students reported odd synchronicities. Pages of unrelated scores containing motifs that matched transcribed fragments of the lost hymn. One percussionist, Samir Bakshi, claimed he'd written a short solo for his final that, when played backward, mirrored the tape's final 30 seconds. "I didn't copy anything," he said. "It came to me in a dream." The administration dismissed these occurrences as academic stress and coincidence. But within the old music building, professors whispered that the room was still active. Blaze wasn't finished. In March 2003, he led an unofficial session with 4 faculty singers in an unused lecture hall, as far from Choral Room 6 as possible. Using the fragments of the original score, he reconstructed what he called a safe scale, a simplified version of the hymn stripped of its most volatile transitions. They recorded the session using a digital field recorder. The audio lasts 6 minutes. At first, it's uneventful. The singers chant in modal unison, their voices a gentle drone. But at 4:13, a harmonic fold appears, not a mistake, but an overlapping dissonance that pulses without time signature. The singers stop, confused. On the recording, a low tone fades in beneath the confusion. None of them remember hearing it live. That tone is still unexplained. It resembles the pitch of a contrabassoon, but with overtones at 22 kHz and 42 kHz, well above human hearing. When slowed, it forms a cyclical pattern that spectrogram analysis mapped into a spiral. It matched the chalkboard spiral from the Corvus choir photo. Blaze retired from teaching 6 months later, citing neuroacoustic complications. In a rare interview, he said, "Some spaces echo back the future. The official position of St. Elgar's remains unchanged. Choral Room 6 was an anomaly, a closed case. But faculty turnover in the music department accelerated in the years following Blaze's experiment. Several students took medical leave for auditory hallucinations. One professor's hearing collapsed in one ear, but instead of silence, he claimed to hear singing. "I think the room still sings," he said, "but not in time, in potential, and the harmony lingers." The man who designed Choral Room 6 was not an architect by trade. His name was Alwyn Greaves. Born in 1841 in Sussex, he began his career not in building, but in composition, a minor English composer whose works were rarely performed and never published. By 1879, Greaves had abandoned the concert hall for more esoteric pursuits. He became involved in a loose circle of spiritualists and fringe mathematicians in Bath who believed in something they called the audible geometry of the divine. Their theory was simple and strange, that certain spatial dimensions could amplify or suppress spiritual frequencies. That architecture, if aligned properly with sound, could act as a tuner, not of radios, of souls. Greaves left almost no written record, but one of his acquaintances, a theosophist named Elias Murch, mentions him in a letter dated March 1886. Alwyn has drawn plans for a space that is not meant to be entered, but sung into. He speaks of angles that blur pitch and doorways that require harmonic keys. He says a choir is a key, and that his room will be a lock. 3 years later, in 1889, the construction of St. Elgar's College included a sudden and unexplained addition. A single, windowless room abutting the east side of the choral wing. There is no surviving proposal, no funding records, no blueprint. But tucked into a maintenance ledger, filed under miscellaneous improvements, is a brief entry. One chamber added, designed by Mr. A. Greaves. Purpose: tonal study. That is the only official reference to Choral Room 6's construction. After 1890, Alwyn Greaves vanishes from the historical record. No death certificate. No obituary. No known relatives. It is as if he built the room and walked inside. But the room remembers him. In 1994, during a restoration project, a panel behind the chalkboard in Room 6 was briefly removed before the room was resealed. Inside the wall, workmen found a sealed envelope, warped by humidity. It contained a single page, yellowed, handwritten, and unsigned. The handwriting matched a surviving musical draft attributed to Greaves. It read, "There are 2 kinds of silence, the one that follows sound and the one that waits for it. I have built the second." Forensic analysis of the letter revealed trace particles of bone dust. The ink contained traces of manganese and iron, materials often used in early phonographic cylinders. The page was reclassified as part of the Ash collection and locked away by archivist Dr. Raymond Ash. But that wasn't the last sign of Greaves. In 2008, a researcher compiling census data from the 19th century discovered a curious entry in the 1881 register. It listed Greaves' profession not as composer or architect, but as auditory cartographer. This term appears nowhere else in the archive. But in the margin of the same document, someone had scribbled a symbol in blue pencil, a spiral with 4 radial marks at cardinal points, the same shape that would later appear on the chalkboard in the Corvus choir photograph. The same pattern revealed in the spectrogram of Blaze's 2003 recording. It appears Greaves was drawing the same structure others would find again, not just in sound but in space, a geometry that resonates. This raised an unsettling question. Was the hymn truly discovered by Meredith, or had it always been part of the room? Was it planted not on paper but in resonance? A song waiting to be remembered? Acoustician Nadia Farrow, the daughter of the lecturer who once collapsed near the room, took an interest in this theory. In 2013, she conducted an experiment using LiDAR scans of the room's external dimensions, comparing them with historical records and internal photographs. The measurements didn't match. The internal volume of Choral Room 6 was approximately 2.3% larger than the external footprint would allow. Not enough to raise alarm, but impossible under standard physics. Farrow published her findings in a fringe academic journal under the title, An Anomalous Chamber, Phase Displacement in Victorian Construction. She was dismissed from her research post 3 months later. No reason given. In her final blog post before going dark, Farrow wrote, "It is not just the sound that loops, it is the space. Something folds inward. We assume rooms are still when not used. What if this one is active? What if it remembers?" That phrase appears again. Active. Used by Blaze. Used by multiple faculty. Used by Ellis Morgan before his disappearance. By 2015, the university quietly removed all references to Choral Room 6 from their campus orientation materials. Maps were redrawn, the corridor rerouted. Students were told the East Wing had infrastructure instability, but the tenants in the converted apartments know better. Unit 2C remains unoccupied. The current landlord, who declined to be named, reportedly offers it at a reduced rate, yet no one stays more than a month. A repairman sent to check faulty wiring described a bizarre phenomenon. When he entered the unit, his tools began to sing, metallic resonance, faint and shifting, as if struck by invisible tuning forks. His drill bit spun without power, emitting a single unwavering pitch, F-sharp. When tested later, the drill showed no mechanical faults. And F-sharp was the drone note found at 2:08 on the original Corvus choir recording. Some believe the room was a trap, others a gate. But the most disturbing theory comes from the late Dr. Ash's personal notebooks, a page labeled Greaves' hypothesis, which reads, "If a room can be built to conduct a chord, can it also conduct intention? What if sound is not the medium but the message? What if the room is not haunted, but listening?" There is no known grave for Alwyn Greaves. No body. No obituary. But the silence he built persists. And in that silence, a shape lingers. Not seen. Not heard. Only felt. Like breath against the back of your neck. Waiting. For a voice that fits the lock. And a choir that dares to sing again. There are some sounds we remember without ever hearing them. An infant turns toward their mother's heartbeat before birth. A veteran flinches at a firework not because of the sound, but the shape it makes in memory. In Choral Room 6, a sound was heard once. A cursed, harmonic construct, the hymn, sung once and never again, or so we believed. In January 2017, an independent audio engineer named Clara Devane obtained fragments of the 2003 Corvus choir rehearsal tape. These fragments were not public. They were sourced anonymously, delivered to her London studio on a cassette marked only with the phrase, "It's still singing." Devane specialized in reverse forensic acoustics, a practice used in aviation disaster investigations, where analysts reconstruct voices or mechanical patterns from distorted black box recordings. She approached the Corvus tape not as a composition, but as a spectral anomaly. Using proprietary software and a modified spectrogram analysis, she isolated an audio cluster that existed beneath the audible range, between 6 Hz and 12 Hz. a band generally undetectable to human hearing. But when the waveform was inverted and compressed, something chilling emerged. A second, lower hymn, slower, reversed. In Devane's words, it was like an echo bouncing off something that hadn't happened yet. The same melody, sung in reverse, with fewer voices, as if the choir were diminishing, one by one. When she tried to extract the inverted signal into a standalone file, the session crashed. Not just her software, the entire OS. Her backups were corrupted. Metadata on the file mutated. Timestamps changed. Folders were renamed. And then her studio clock began ticking backward. That's when she stopped. 3 weeks later, Devane disappeared. Police found her studio door locked from the inside. The room was empty, except for the speakers, still humming at 6.3 hertz. No trace of her has ever been found. The digital fragment she recovered, less than 15 seconds long, was recovered from a remote backup by her assistant. That clip, when played to certain subjects under lab conditions, produced an unlikely range of side effects. Sweating despite cold conditions, disorientation, the perception that time was moving slowly, or not at all, a persistent auditory hallucination, a high, female voice speaking in Middle Welsh. One subject described the sound as a voice caught inside a spiral. Another said simply, "I don't think the song is finished. I think it's growing backward." This was not a metaphor. In April 2018, a PhD candidate in Scotland, Joel Altham, conducted an experiment without university approval. His goal was to digitally recreate the original hymn from known fragments using machine learning, essentially training an AI to generate the song that had been lost. He fed it the Corvus choir tape, the background resonance from Room 6, the isolated F-sharp tone from the maintenance man's tool, and crucially, Clara Devane's reverse sample. The model produced a choral output just under 4 minutes long. It was never released publicly. Altham played it for himself once, and immediately experienced acute temporal displacement. For 5 hours, he remained conscious and functional, but believed it was still the same minute. He wrote over 30 pages of fragmented notes during this episode. Repetitive, obsessive, the same symbols over and over again. A spiral, a key, a door with no frame. One phrase appears 17 times in the margin. The past is trying to remember itself. His advisors intervened. Altham was institutionalized for 1 year, then quietly relocated. His digital reconstruction, later known as the Altham sequence, was quarantined by a joint task force under the UK's Office for Harmonic Safety, a bureaucratic shell entity believed by some to be entirely fictional. Yet the sequence persists. It has been found 3 more times in the years since, under different names. Once uploaded to a gaming forum as a custom medieval ambience loop. Once hidden inside a TikTok filter's source audio. Once played at a club in Berlin under the name HWM6. Each time it resulted in psychological breakdowns. Not instant, not violent, but gradual like erosion, like reality peeling away. A former neurolinguist with the Vienna Harmonic Institute, Dr. Elsa Koenig, began to develop a theory that the original hymn was not just a song, but a mnemonic artifact, a structure embedded with instructions. She called it retroactive encoding. Her theory suggested that the human mind, when exposed to certain harmonic intervals, particularly those in the medieval Phrygian mode, attempts to resolve the melody even after the sound has ended. It's like a song that keeps rewriting the listener's memory, so that the past reshapes itself around the melody. Koenig proposed that the people exposed to the hymn were not remembering the song was remembering them. And then the cases began to spread. Alumni of St. Elgar's who had once sung in the Corvus choir began reporting temporal disturbances. Dreams that bled into waking life, hearing their own voice calling from another room. One woman, now an optometrist in Cardiff, wrote in her journal, "I dreamed I was back in the room, but it was older than I remembered. The walls were wider. The air pulsed. There were no doors." Another, who hadn't heard the song in over 2 decades, described rehearsing it in her sleep. She awoke hoarse. Her husband, asleep beside her, had bruises on his throat. In 2020, one former student, now a programmer, created a VR simulation of Choral Room 6 using architectural memory, yearbook photos, and grainy archive images. The simulation was primitive, but anyone who had been in the real room reported the same feeling after trying it. It's too accurate, but not because of the walls, because of the air. Inside the simulation, some reported hearing fragments of the hymn even when the sound was muted. The software was eventually taken offline. One test user, after 10 minutes inside the model, removed the headset and stared for 3 hours at a blank wall. When asked why, she simply said, "I was listening for the door." But perhaps the most disturbing revelation came from the old records vault beneath the library at St. Elgar's. In late 2021, during flood mitigation efforts, volunteers found a warped storage box sealed in wax. Inside, a series of brittle phonograph cylinders, unmarked except for a repeated sigil, the same spiral seen in Greaves' materials. One cylinder, when played, contained a garbled vocal sequence. Faint, reversed, overlapping voices. Some scholars believe it is the original version of the hymn, recorded during Greaves' time. But deeper analysis suggests something far more unsettling. The recording matches the modern Altham sequence, note for note, meaning either the digital reconstruction was perfect by accident or design, or the song somehow had always existed, encoded in time itself. Or worse, the recording from the past was of a song that hadn't been sung yet. As one researcher put it, it's not that the hymn travels through time, it's that time travels through the hymn. And so we return to the question posed by Ash, by Greaves, by Farrow, and by the countless others who brushed too close to Choral Room 6. Was the room a key? Was it a lock? Or was it a mouth? Place that doesn't sing, but listens, and waits. By 2012, the story of Choral Room 6 had faded from public memory, but within the university's older alumni circles and scattered online forums, whispers continued. Most had dismissed it as an urban legend, exaggerated by retellings and the eerie allure of silence. But the building itself, the bones of St. Elgar's, was not finished. In June of that year, Unit 2C, which shared a wall with the sealed room, was leased to an artist named Miriam DeWitt, a painter from Bristol known for her abstract expressionist work. Miriam was looking for quiet. She had recently lost her mother and was seeking solitude to focus on a new series of large-format oils. The high ceilings, tall windows, and thick stone walls of the converted college made it perfect. First, she noticed it during the third week. The hum. It was low, persistent. Not mechanical, it didn't match any of the radiators or plumbing. It seemed organic. Miriam first thought it was in her ears, but recordings picked it up too. A soft resonance, tonal but indistinct. She began adjusting her painting schedule, working only when the sound was loudest. "It made my brush flow," she said later, "like something was keeping tempo." But the paintings changed. They moved away from color fields and geometric abstraction. The canvas began to fill with spirals, overlapping choirs of faceless figures, warped architecture. One piece, never publicly shown, was titled 16-fold Amen and featured 16 black-robed figures folding inward into the mouth of a tunnel shaped like a human ear. Miriam's friends grew concerned. During a studio visit, one fellow artist asked why the new paintings felt like they were breathing. Miriam reportedly laughed and said, "They're singing, not breathing." By August, Miriam had begun hearing tapping in the floorboards. Not at night, during the day. Rhythmic, deliberate, always in sets of 16. She recorded the tapping and sent it to a sound technician friend. He analyzed the file and found that the taps, when run through a frequency-to-MIDI conversion, formed the opening motif of the Corvus hymn. The technician didn't know what it was. He assumed it was an avant-garde composition, but the pattern was unmistakable. Miriam's decline accelerated. Neighbors said she stopped leaving her apartment. Groceries were left outside her door. The windows were covered in canvas and black cloth. Then, one night in September, she called the building's superintendent and said there was a voice in the floor asking her to join in. She was found 2 days later, alive. sitting cross-legged on the floor in her studio. Around her, 16 paintings, all new, all depicting the same room, a narrow chapel with scorched pews arranged in a spiral. Each painting showed the room from a slightly different angle. When stitched together in sequence, they formed a panoramic map of Choral Room 6, down to the exact pattern of burn marks on the wood. Miriam had never seen the room. She was institutionalized for observation. In her interviews with psychiatrists, she made frequent mention of a song without time and claimed she could still hear the harmony. "It's under everything," she said. "In the pipes, in the plaster, like the walls are learning it." Her artwork was confiscated by the university under the claim of potential archival value. Unofficially, several pieces disappeared. That same year, a researcher named Dr. Katrin Llewellyn, specializing in architectural acoustics, became interested in the building. She had read about St. Elgar's in a now-deleted message board and was intrigued by the idea that a space could retain sound. Her proposal to map acoustic residues using contact microphones was approved, and in November 2012, she began her analysis. Llewellyn's equipment was sophisticated contact mics, resonance probes, and a custom algorithm designed to isolate anomalous frequencies. Over the course of 3 weeks, she recorded hundreds of hours of ambient resonance data from the walls and floors surrounding Choral Room 6. The results were bizarre. Most of the building presented typical decay signatures: vibrations from plumbing, echoes of distant traffic, subsonic tremors. But the wall shared with Choral Room 6 emitted sustained frequencies far beyond the expected range. One tone in particular, 1760 Hz, the exact pitch of A6, pulsed in regular intervals every 16 seconds. When graphed over time, the pulses formed a spiral. The same spiral. Llewellyn wrote in her report, "This isn't reverberation, it's repetition, as if the room isn't reflecting sound, but remembering it." She later admitted that her sleep began to suffer during the analysis. "I kept hearing choral bursts in the white noise of my recordings, always in 4 parts. I'd isolate the frequencies and they wouldn't be there, but I'd hear them again later. The same phrase, the same progression." She ended the project early. Her conclusion: Choral Room 6 exhibits acoustic characteristics incompatible with Euclidean space. Further study not advised without protection protocols. But the research didn't end. In 2013, a graduate student named Leo Martin attempted to reconstruct the original hymn using Llewellyn's resonance data and fragments from Meredith's sketches. He used a digital choral engine to simulate the 16 voices and ran the output through a convolution filter based on the room's mapped response curve. He never released the file. 2 weeks later, Martin suffered a nervous breakdown and withdrew from the university. His thesis advisor later found pages of his notes blacked out, with only one phrase repeated in the margins. "They don't want melody, they want memory." By 2015, scattered data points had begun forming something else. Not an explanation, nothing so neat but a shape. Tendency. There were now 3 sets of individuals affected by the hymn. The original choir members, indirect witnesses like Miriam and Llewellyn, and one final group: listeners. This last category emerged by accident. On a private Discord server dedicated to obscure British hauntings, a user named @ornithophile posted a heavily degraded audio file they claimed came from a disused practice tape from 1965. It was low quality and filled with hiss, but clearly tonal. The uploader warned others not to listen all the way through. "Too many foldings," they wrote. No one understood what they meant. The file was reposted on Reddit, SoundCloud, and finally YouTube under the title Monastery Echo Number 16. It lasted exactly 3 minutes and 12 seconds. By the end of the week, the comments were filled with strange replies. "Heard it on loop. Can't stop drawing spirals. My walls make this exact pitch now. Does anyone else taste copper in the last 30 seconds? The video was eventually removed after a DMCA takedown request filed by an anonymous entity believed to be linked with the university. Archive copies remain, but they distort literally. Some files desynchronize on playback, slowly shifting the pitch upward every 16 seconds. Then there were the journals. A retired archivist named Gregory Payne, who had worked in the Welsh National Library in Aberystwyth, reached out to Llewellyn with documents he had withheld during the original investigations. These were fragments from the pre-Reformation years, personal writings from monks who had lived near the area now occupied by St. Elgers. One letter, dated 1491, described a sung ritual for shaping prayer into place. The monk wrote, "It is not the voice but the repetition that pleases him. Each tone recalls the last. It is through this folding that the shape is made and the world listens." Another fragment referenced a term, anamnesic spiral. Llewellyn, unnerved, sent these to a linguist at Cambridge. The linguist responded with a single line. Whoever wrote this was not composing for ears. They were composing for space itself. What does that mean, to compose for space? Architectural historians suggested the chapel was built using principles of sacred geometry, aligning angles and ratios to echo harmonic intervals. Llewellyn's final paper, which she never published formally, was titled Resonant Containment, the hymn as structure. She theorized that Choral Room 6 was never meant to be a performance space. It was the instrument. The hymn wasn't meant to be heard. It was meant to be played into the room, not to sound, but to shape. The scorched pattern in the floorboards wasn't damage. It was the result. In her notes, Llewellyn proposed a horrifying idea. The Corvus hymn does not summon. It synchronizes. A listener does not hear the hymn. They become a resonant chamber for it. And if enough bodies echo it in unison, the world around them folds to accommodate. This is not summoning. It is synchronization. And it explains why the original choir vanished. Not into death, but into harmony. By 2022, the university had sealed all archival materials connected to Choral Room 6. Even internal references to the Corvus hymn were scrubbed from syllabi, music databases, and digital repositories. Students requesting access received a polite error, record not found. But the hymn didn't disappear. It simply receded like an undertow. One final account comes from an unlikely source, a facilities contractor named Simon Price. In April of that year, Simon was assigned to survey humidity damage in the East Wing, the wing that shared foundations with the former choral wing. Price was not a believer in ghosts, nor was he a musician, but he was meticulous. He recorded his site visits with a GoPro mounted to his hard hat, a habit born from years of liability disputes. On April 16th, he entered the crawlspace beneath the old wing. The footage, later recovered, shows routine maintenance, cracked joints, black mold, an idle length of piping vibrating without contact. Simon notes this aloud. Weird hum down here. Not water. Not gas. 30 minutes in, his camera begins to pick up what sounds like harmonic flutter, barely audible to the untrained ear. At first, it's easy to mistake for wind. But over the next several minutes, the tone stabilizes into recognizable pitches. G, A, F, E. Then silence. Simon reemerges into the hallway, confused. The timestamp on his video says 11:03 a.m. His phone reads 2:47 p.m. 3 hours, lost. He would later say, under duress, that he had not stopped recording. The video remains continuous, without edits. And yet, somewhere between two doorframes, time vanishes. Frame-by-frame analysis shows microjitter in the hallway light, pulses every 16 frames. Simon didn't file the footage. He sent it directly to his cousin, a video editor in Swansea. The cousin enhanced the audio and ran a phase scan. The results: a nested waveform in the silent section of the crawlspace. Not an echo, a recursive pulse, identical to the one found in Llewellyn's resonance data. 2 weeks later, Simon quit his job. When asked why, he said, "I wasn't walking on floorboards. I was walking through a throat." That same month, a former music student named Ellis Thorne uploaded a video titled, "I Heard It Too," to an anonymous Vimeo channel. The video shows a rotating LiDAR scan of a sealed room, a rough reconstruction based on schematics believed to have originated from the university's lost archives. The room's proportions match those of Choral Room 6. But what's inside is impossible. The model shows 16 vertical spires arranged in a spiral. Each spire is constructed not of solid matter, but of denser acoustic data, as if the room had been imprinted by sound intense enough to affect physical space. These are not support beams. They are resonance columns. The scan ends with a panning shot of the wall. There, etched into the brick behind what would have been the conductor's platform, is a symbol, a black feather inside a spiral. Underneath, one Latin word, Memoria. What was the Corvus hymn? It was not a composition. It was not music in the traditional sense. It was an event, a harmonic convergence encoded in human voice, designed to bend space into memory and memory into echo. The phrase keeps returning, they don't want melody, they want memory. When we remember something deeply enough, we relive it. When we sing something with enough force, we remake it. Perhaps the choir didn't vanish. Perhaps they became what the room was always waiting for. A vessel not for performance, but for recurrence. A space designed not to hold people, but to hold the memory of people, to hold them perfectly in tune. In the months following the rediscovery of the LiDAR scan and Simon Price's footage, a new wave of interest surged among online fringe researchers, sound engineers, and esoteric archivists. The central question was no longer what the Corvus hymn was, but why it existed at all. Among the more grounded theories came from Dr. Afsaneh Rahim, a cognitive acoustician from the University of Glasgow. In a paper titled Harmonic Triggers and Memory Retention in Reverberative Environments, she posited that extreme acoustic architecture, when paired with precisely tuned harmonic stimuli, could potentially unlock deeply embedded memory networks in the human brain. In short, a room could be built to remember, and people within it could briefly become part of that memory. Rahim never mentioned Choral Room 6 directly, but she did reference an undocumented site in Carmarthenshire known to produce non-local echo phenomena. Her hypothesis drew on rare neurological cases, particularly instances of shared hallucination and induced musical seizures. She proposed that under very specific conditions, the human auditory cortex could act not only as a receiver but as an amplifier of environmental memory. One quote stands out, "The brain is a resonant chamber. Under strain it does not break. It repeats." A fringe group latched onto this. Calling themselves the Folded Choir, they began producing low-frequency compositions derived from public domain audio claimed to originate near the St. Elgar site. Their tracks used layered reverberation, binaural phasing, and dissonant harmonics. Some were uploaded to obscure audio forums, others circulated via encrypted torrents labeled only with feather-shaped sigils. Listeners began reporting strange effects: microsleeps, auditory distortions, loss of time. One forum user posted, "Listen to FC7 on loop for 16 minutes. Woke up with blood from my left ear and a drawing of a spiral I don't remember making. The shape is exact." Another uploaded a photo of sheet music found on their kitchen table the next morning. The notes formed a spiral clef. Dr. Rahim was contacted for comment. Her reply was curt, "Stop playing it. It's not music. It's exposure." And then the dream cases began. Across multiple forums and even among unrelated YouTube commenters, a pattern emerged. A recurring dream of a narrow chapel, scorched wooden pews, and a central platform on which no one stands. In the dream, a voice hums 4 tones. G-A-F-E. Each time the dream ends with the dreamer walking down into the spiral, hearing their own voice echo back in harmony. Only, it's not quite their voice. It's older. This final phenomenon, now referred to as resonant echoing, is under active study in a private research project at an undisclosed location. Initial analysis suggests these experiences are not isolated. In EEG readings taken from volunteers who listened to folded choir tracks for more than 15 minutes, patterns of synchronous neural firing emerged every 16 seconds. One neuroscientist wrote anonymously, "It's like their brains were keeping time with something outside the recording. Like the room is real, and they're tuning into it." So what is Choral Room 6 now? It is a place without sound, yet full of music. A silence shaped by memory, not haunted, resonant. And those who hear it in dreams or in data are not victims. They are participants, not listeners, echoes. The final investigations into Choral Room 6 no longer focused on architecture, history, or even music. They focused on the body. In 2023, a coalition of independent researchers, rogue archivists, and acoustics engineers, collectively identifying only as Ordo Memoria, attempted the unthinkable, to replicate the harmonic environment of the lost room. Not physically, but neuroacoustically. Their premise was simple. If the human brain could serve as a resonator for embedded acoustic memory, then perhaps a certain configuration of frequency, repetition, and spatial delay could simulate the conditions of Room 6. This was not simply an experiment in auditory replication. It was an attempt to invite the room itself into the minds of its listeners. The setup was meticulous. A subterranean soundproof chamber in rural Brittany was modified into what the researchers called a reverberation field, a space in which every sonic pulse, reflection, and interference could be tracked and modified in real time. An array of 144 speakers encircled the chamber, each calibrated to emit narrowband frequencies tuned precisely to the decaying harmonics extracted from the only surviving snippet of the Corvus hymn. The volunteers were chosen through an encrypted forum maintained by Ordo Memoria. Each had described recurring dreams of dark staircases, echoing tones, and an unseen voice humming 4 notes in sequence. GFE. Several had reported spontaneous episodes of musical hallucination after encountering folded choir compositions. One subject had tattooed a perfect logarithmic spiral across his back, claiming it had been instructed to him through a sequence of dreams. All agreed to undergo the procedure anonymously. The procedure, called echo induction, lasted precisely 1 hour. The chamber lights were extinguished. Each participant wore a high-density EEG cap and was seated in a padded chair equipped with bone conduction transducers. Over the course of the session, a low-intensity harmonic pulse was broadcast, initially imperceptible, then gradually rising in complexity, like an unfurling fugue. Observers in the adjacent control room noted a pattern early on. Every 16 seconds, subjects would exhibit a synchronized involuntary muscle twitch, most often in the hands or throat. Some hummed. Some clenched their fists in time with the pulse. By the 32-minute mark, every subject's EEG showed overlapping theta wave activity across the temporal lobes. This was expected. What was not expected was the emergence of a 5th tone. G, A, F, E, Ch. Not in the audio output, not in the pre-programmed pulse, but from the subjects themselves. Each began in unison humming that final note. Some through clenched teeth, some deep in the throat. The C-tone had not been introduced by the system. It had been conjured, spontaneously, collectively, without cue. By minute 53, one subject, known only as Subject 11, began weeping silently. His mouth moved, repeating a sequence of syllables not yet translated. Lip readers analyzing the footage have attempted to interpret them. Convergence, return. Then came the collapse. At the 61-minute mark, power to the chamber surged and cut out. Emergency systems triggered, and backup lighting revealed the interior of the chamber. All 17 chairs were filled. All 17 EEG recordings were active. But only 16 subjects could be accounted for on video. Subject 17 was gone. The chair was occupied. The EEG cap remained. The straps were still secured. But the body was missing. Worse still, the final EEG log from Subject 17 continued transmitting for 3 minutes after the blackout. The neural signals showed not chaos, but rhythm. An elegant waveform cycling in 4-bar patterns, aligned perfectly to the GAFE sequence. Acoustic engineers have attempted to convert this brainwave sequence into audio. The result is haunting. A low, humming chant that seems to echo even when the track is paused. Audio analysis reveals a strange feature. Within the reverberation decay are embedded whispers, suggesting not a single voice, but a roomful. And within that chorus, a singular phrase is repeated in Latin. Nos non cantavimus in vanum. We did not sing in vain. Public disclosure of this experiment was never intended. But in mid-2024, encrypted documents from Ordo Memoria leaked to a private repository frequented by acoustic theorists and forbidden musicologists. The files include schematics of the chamber EEG data and a manifesto simply titled On the Nature of Sonic Imprint. Its core assertion, Choral Room 6 was not the origin point. It was a relay, a constructed chamber capable of capturing, amplifying, and storing human acoustic presence, not merely as sound but as essence. Not a recording in the mechanical sense but in the ontological sense. The human voice, when aligned, does not fade. It binds. And those who enter the room, whether physically in 1965 or cognitively through resonance in the present, do not leave. Not entirely. They are folded. Folded into the echo. Folded into the shape of memory. And the spiral? It is not a trap. It is a gate. One final note emerged in the weeks following the leak. A 28-second audio file posted anonymously to a defunct mailing list. It is labeled FC17X. It begins with silence, then a pulse, then the four notes, G, E, and then C. A chord follows, impossible to describe. Analysts call it dissonant and luminous at once. The sound of a choir that should not exist. And at the very end, a breath, not intake, exhale, as if someone or something has just finished singing. There is no final door in the traditional sense, no closing of a corridor or silence of song. Only what echoes become. The documents leaked by Ordo Memoria in 2024 did more than illuminate a hidden experiment. They seeded a meme, a contagious idea, acoustic in form, linguistic in shape. As researchers, artists, and occultists around the world parsed the files, fragments of the Corvus hymn began appearing in disparate, uncontrolled spaces. A violinist in Kyoto dreamt of an unfamiliar staff notation and transcribed it. A blind composer in Oslo reported waking from a trance having recorded a drone piece which, when analyzed, matched the GFE motif precisely. A young chorister in Montreal, unaware of any prior recordings, hummed the fifth tone, the infamous C, from a locked bathroom during a school concert. None of them were connected. All of them were resonant. Audio forensic experts from the Center for Psychoacoustic Research compiled over 700 such cases in less than 10 months. The conclusion was not empirical but ontological. Room 6 did not end in 1965, nor in the 2023 replication. It unfolded. It is unfolding. The theory put forward by the Manifesto on the nature of sonic imprint gained traction outside its intended niche. The central claim: human memory is not stored, but refracted, curved endlessly inward through repetition and harmonic alignment. In this view, the spiral is more than geometry. It is method. According to Ordo Memoria's final notes, resonance phenomena emerge most strongly near objects made from oak, limestone, and bronze, materials found in the original room SIXS construction. These become passive nodes in a larger network. Not just buildings, but bodies, vocal cords, bone. The phenomenon is no longer bound to one room. In early 2025, an underground archive in Krakow reported a sudden failure in its analog sound storage vaults. Tapes snapped without pressure. Reel-to-reel decks reversed themselves in perfect synchronicity. The only surviving snippet captured what archivists described as a whispering crescendo that repeated a single word: Reditum, return. By February, an anonymous user posted a map to the dark web.
No coordinates.
Only harmonic spectrograms and room dimensions. It listed 16 locations around the world. A forgotten abbey in southern France. A derelict subway station beneath Liverpool. A sealed minaret in Damascus. A private music room in Vienna built with mathematically perfect acoustic dimensions. Each site was marked with a single label: Fold Point. Explorers, urban adventurers, spiritual seekers, sound artists began visiting. Each location had strange properties: unusual reverb, compass malfunction, spontaneous nosebleeds. But in every case, audio captured inside the space would, upon spectral analysis, contain fragments of the Corvus hymn, sometimes in reverse, sometimes embedded in ambient hiss. The Fold Choir is no longer theoretical. In late March 2025, a live stream surfaced briefly on a Romanian video forum before being deleted. It showed a group of 17 individuals seated in a perfect spiral in a candlelit chamber. Each wore a robe, identical to the 1965 description. The conductor, hooded, silent, lifted no baton. And yet, the choir sang. No words, just tone. The fifth note emerging as if exhaled from the room itself. Viewers reported nausea, euphoria, and crying during playback. Some claimed they could hear their own name in the background harmonics. Others could not stop humming the sequence for days. You cannot copyright a frequency. You cannot silence a shape. The final document recovered from Ordo Memoria bears no date. It is not a study or a confession. It is a transcript. For pages. No title. Only one notation at the top. Transcribed from interior of fold point number 6. Audio source unknown. The content is a monologue. You have come not to listen, but to be listened through. You are not the witness. You are the wire. The choir is not performance, it is transmission. A signal into the wet voltage of thought. That's why you remember rooms you've never been in. Why you hum songs you've never heard. You were already folded. The moment the note found you. We do not sing to be heard. We sing to be kept. Now breathe, not in. Leave the air for us. We will shape it into him. The last line is not in Latin. It is not in English. It is sung. A chord no one can place, yet all can feel. And when it ends, silence does not return. It listens back.